inpatient experiences. I had medication experiences. I had at least a dozen psychiatrists and primary care physicians, dietitians, nutritionists, behavioral therapists, one-on-one therapy, group therapy. I had done it all, and all of it failed. I shouldn't have survived, because we all know that the 100 plus neurotransmitters in our brain completely depend on amino acids to be made. And those complete amino acids without any anti-nutrients are only found in meat. So I think a large component of it was nutrition.
Well, hi everybody, and welcome to Bold Carnivore. Today we're sitting down with Valerie Smith. She has been a carnivore for about, this is, I believe, your 7th year, yes?
Yes, yes, starting my 7th.
Awesome.
I'm carnivore 6, yes.
So she had several health problems, in fact, severe health problems that have been resolved not through medication and visiting doctors and dietitians, but from dropping everything that she was eating and changing her diet dramatically. Hi, Valerie. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Matthew. It's great to be here.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Now, I know that you've been on interview circuit for a while now, and you've been telling your story, and I've seen you on Instagram quite a bit, and I've seen a lot of the things that you've had to deal with on Instagram. So this is going to be a very interesting interview, I'm sure. But please, Valerie, tell us somewhat about your story. Where did all this begin?
This all began when I was a child. I turned 54 a few weeks ago, and I spent most of 40 years very, very ill. And even prior to actually being diagnosed with certain mental health issues and certain physical issues, I wasn't well as a child either, even before anything was ever diagnosed. I was very depressed and anxious as a very young child, and I'm talking, under the age of 8 and 10, I was not well. I had some health issues back then. I was kind of frail and on a lot of antibiotics at certain points. The anxiety and the depression caused me to have an ulcer diagnosis at 12. That's how bad my anxiety was. And I had digestive issues, which I thought would take care of itself once I was on the ulcer medications that were offered back then. But of course, it didn't do anything for the digestive issues. And then when I entered puberty, 12, 13, 14 years old, the mental health issues became much worse, and new ones, were added in there. So I was diagnosed officially with clinical depression, anxiety and panic disorder, schizoaffective disorder, which is a horrendous illness to deal with screaming voices that scream at you 24 hours a day, and all of the paranoia and the darkness that comes with that of harming yourself and being told to harm others. It's a very dark, tormented existence. I was also diagnosed with anorexia. There was a large element of my life devoted to self-harm and self-punishment, and it manifested in the drive to starve because my brain wasn't working correctly. I was diagnosed with OCD, and at the beginning, it was what most people think of obsessive compulsive disorder. It was a lot of making lists and checking things and checking locks and counting things. And for me, with the anorexia component, it meant memorizing and obsessing over calorie books and incessantly writing everything down and trying to be lower food the next day than I was previously. And as the decades went on, the OCD got much worse, and it morphed into more self-harm, manifesting itself as cutting. I was cutting my arms and legs to deal with stress, and also diagnosed with a condition called trichotillomania, which is hair pulling. I was pulling hair from my scalp and my eyebrows and my eyelashes. So all of those combined put me on a path, a descent into madness decade after decade. And I was under traditional treatment all of this time. My family rallied around me and did what they thought was going to bring the best relief for me in terms of the mental illnesses. So I was under traditional treatment all that time. I had inpatient experiences. I had medication experiences. I had at least a dozen psychiatrists and primary care physicians, dietitians, nutritionists, behavioral therapists, one-on-one therapy, group therapy. I had done it all, and all of it failed. So that's a little bit about how badly it got. I'm 5'9", and most of those years I was between 75 and 80 pounds, and I shouldn't have survived. So, but I'm thankful that I am. Anorexia holds the highest mortality rate of all psychiatric illnesses. It's 20%, 1 in 5 die, and they either die from starvation or suicide, because it's the only way you can escape the torment and the pain, or they suffer from organ failure, stroke, heart attack. Those organs will only survive so long, and before they succumb to starvation. So that's a short version of what I had previously gone through.
So 40 plus years of absolute torment, and it started back when you were a very young person.
Yes.
May I ask, what was it that triggered all of that to start, or was it inborn or genetic, or do you think that it was diet related all the way back then?
I don't, what I'm going to talk about, I don't think played into my brain not functioning correctly, but part of the component of a little bit of the depression and the anxiety surrounded the relationship or lack thereof with my biological father. He left our family when I was a toddler, and he was in and out of my life. I was estranged from him, and there was a lot of verbal and emotional abuse that went on when he would pop back into my life. And I felt like I was unlovable, that I was not worthy of love. And so that, there's a small psychological component in there that would set me up for just not being a happy-go-lucky, joyful child. But that doesn't explain, going through therapy, dealing with those issues, and then being able to process them, and which I have, but the mental illnesses remained. I dealt with all of that. I don't have any animosity towards him. He and I have since reconciled and are now friends. And so those components were there, but that doesn't explain why my brain wasn't working correctly. I look back on it now, and I look specifically at what my nutrition was then, and all of the antibiotics that I was on that we know affects your gut health. I don't want to point blame. My family did the best that they could with the knowledge that they had, and the nutrition guidelines at the time. It's not anyone's fault of what I was eating or not eating. In the 70s, everyone was on the low-fat, margarine, no egg craze. This was how we lived. This was what was in our refrigerator. This was, I ate a lot of pasta. I ate a lot of noodles. I ate a lot of potatoes and other vegetables, not much meat. no dairy, no eggs. And I know that those tendencies had to have had an impact on whether my brain was going to have what it needed to thrive, because we all know that the 100+ neurotransmitters in our brain completely depend on amino acids to be made. And those complete amino acids without any anti-nutrients are only found in meat. And so I think a large component of it was nutrition. I think, I really do. I really think that. But like I said, it was what everyone was was eating, basically. That's what the guidelines were and basically still are.
That's the case. That is the case. And they like to say that those guidelines are there just so that people can make informed decisions and can maybe help guide company policy. But we all know that it's adapted across the board and adopted entirely. Everyone uses it because they really aren't given any other options, especially when it's taught as a reality throughout schooling that this is the right way to do this.
Yeah,
so everyone makes those
even
choices.
Even when I was inpatient, I didn't experience a difference in nutrition there. You would think, being under the care and in an inpatient setting, if I was supposed to be eating differently, it would have been taught to me there, and it wasn't. Every inpatient experience started off with a nasogastric feeding tube, the tube that goes, down the nose and into the stomach, and 6 times a day, the liquid nutrition, which there's no nutrition in it, is pumped through. And all of these have similarities, these same top 3 ingredients. It's canola oil, soy, and high fructose corn syrup. Well, there's no nutrition in there for the brain. And it's the same components of anyone who's had surgery, or elderly or geriatric, or has someone who's had throat issues. They're all put on the same NG feeding tube. And this is some of the same products that we buy over the counter. Elderly people or parents that have children that just aren't thriving, they will buy Boost and Ensure, over the counter drinks in the can. That's what the top 3 ingredients are in those also. So we have a whole generation of people that are drinking what they think is nutrition, and what it's doing is causing more inflammation in the brain and not giving any nutrition. And in the inpatient setting, in terms of eating disorders, once the NG feeding tube is removed and you're supposed to try to eat what's brought to you on a tray, it's all plant-based, ultra-processed food. It's pancakes and muffins and cakes and pies and cookies and bread, and oatmeal, and other grains and potatoes, and what they deem as healthy ends up being in the very high oxalate category that can cause more illness. Spinach, sweet potatoes, those items that are touted as superfoods are actually causing harm and causing illness if they're overconsumed. And so even in the inpatient setting, I was told to do more plant-based. And the only time protein was ever brought up was when there was a group meeting and we were taught how to combine like wheat and peanut butter to make a complete protein. It was really from the vegetarian/vegan point of view, because the people that are in charge of some of the hospitals, and the ones that I was in, dates back to the Seventh-day Adventists and the Kellogg brothers, and this is what the hospital as a policy has adopted for nutrition. So they're not going to counsel you or offer red meat or large amounts of any kind of meat, because that's not their philosophy. So even when I was inpatient, I didn't have any new information coming in to make me question if I could feel better or affect my mental health by changing what I ate. That was never presented to me.
Just to make sure that you did eat and eat more, but then
Right.
eating more of the same things that led you to this spiral to start with.
Right. Yeah. Their goal is to have you leave the hospital weighing more on the scale than what you went in. And of course, that is what happens, but it does not heal any sort of mental illness. It's not healing the brain neurotransmitters. It's just that you weigh more when you leave. And myself and many, many others that I have talked to and counseled and visited, their experience is the same. As soon as you're released, you're already thinking about relapse. You're already thinking about how you're going to drop the weight that they've basically forced on you, because nothing has changed mentally. Nothing has healed. And their philosophy is, if you can eat the pies and the cakes and the cookies and you put some weight on, well, then you're no longer anorexic and you're well. And that's not the truth. It isn't. It truly isn't. It does not change brain chemistry. It does not take away the drive to starve. It does not take away the body dysmorphia. It does not take away the self-harm, the obsessive compulsive over exercising and cardio, all of those features that surround what it is to be anorexic. And those are all neurological issues that can be healed on a carnivore diet.
Seems to me that if you take somebody and basically against their will push them to do the thing that they are trying to run all the way to hell and back to avoid, gaining weight, that's not going to fix the problem. Clearly, it's just going to exacerbate it. I would think make it even perhaps quite a bit worse.
It does. It actually does. It makes it worse.
Wow. Okay. So all these merry-go-round rides, and your health is failing, and you're destitute of mental ability to even look beyond your particular pain. How did you start seeing the daylight through all that?
I went through the final 10 years before my healing. I had titrated myself off of the 12 different psych meds that they had tried, because I was functioning worse on them than I was off of them because of the side effects. And that same 10 years, after 30 years of starvation, and then that fourth decade, I began to have major physical medical complications from being that starved. Some of this you don't feel good, but you live with it. I had my adrenals crashed. I had hypothyroid. My thyroid crashed. You're exhausted and tired and cold all the time, and those illnesses don't take you down to death, but you don't feel well on a daily basis. And I also had already been diagnosed with severe osteoporosis at the age of 18. So by the time I was 40, it was so severe that I had had 5 fractures within 5 years. And they were not from trauma. They were just from starvation, because bone is 50% protein, and I had not eaten any for 35 years. And over exercising, the drive of cardio for hours at a time, that puts so much pressure on your body and your bones and your joints that I would just lift something wrong or step wrong, and I would fracture something. My wrist, my arm, my leg, my ankle, my knee. And so I had 5 fractures within 5 years, and each one of those should have taken what they say 4 to 6 weeks to heal. And I followed everything I was supposed to. Crutches, no weight bearing, in bed a lot. It took me months for each fracture to heal because I wasn't feeding myself anything that was going to help in healing. I also had major surgeries that had to happen. I had 7 surgeries within 15 years, all from malnutrition, what was going wrong in my body because of the starvation. The most devastating one was when I was 40 in 2010, and I began to be in a lot of pelvic pain, and I didn't know what was happening. And after being diagnosed by 3 different specialists, they finally had done enough testing to know that the skeletal nature of my body externally, I had not only, run through all of the muscle externally, I no longer had any musculature left internally to hold organs in place. And 3 major organs prolapsed: my colon, my uterus, and my bladder. And they were not only prolapsed internally, when I would stand up, they prolapsed externally. And I was in an excruciating amount of pain. I, of course, was not able to go to the bathroom correctly. It was horrendous. And, that is an emergency surgery situation, but it couldn't be because they had to coordinate, these 3 different specialists had to coordinate their time to be in the operating room at the same time, so that once I was opened up, each surgeon could come in and do their part, and then the next surgeon would come in, because each body part that was compromised needed a different specialist. The colon expert was not going to be able to do anything for my uterus or my bladder, and vice versa on all of those. They all needed a specialist. So I had to have 18 inches of my colon removed and then resectioned and reattached. And they had to suture it to my tailbone internally because there was no muscle to attach it to. My uterus had to be removed. There was no saving it. And my bladder had to be put back in position with massive amounts of mesh surgically to hold it in the position that it needed to be held in. That was a very devastating surgery, not only for me, but for my family. Recovery was extremely difficult because still nothing had changed mentally. I was not feeding myself. I was still actively trying to continue to lose weight. When you're anorexic, there is no number that says on the scale that says, oh, I've arrived, I can stop now. There's no number that's ever low enough. That self-punishment continues on, and whatever weight that you hit on the scale, the next day you want it to go lower. So recovering from that surgery that should have taken a couple of months took me a full year. And it was rough. So my health was so bad, the mental part was bad enough, but the physical part also, this was what my future was going to hold, was going to be more of the same. And I knew I either wasn't going to survive at BMI 11 another year. I was praying every night to not wake up anymore. My only relief was sleep. And the voices would scream so loud that I felt like I was in a movie, those action movies where someone is trying to get information from someone else and they're blaring music and lights and you can't escape it. That's what I felt 24 hours a day, except for when I slept. So I was at the point where I was very helpless and hopeless. I knew that continuing on with any sort of what I had tried before was not going to work. It's like the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over was not going to bring a different result. I knew that being weight restored did nothing except for make me worse, because I had been weight restored a couple of times in that 40 years. but it was always on carbs. And I knew that wasn't the answer. So I had nothing left to try. All of the doctors that I had deemed this permanent. My mental illnesses, they said, you just have to accept it, that there's nothing more that we can do for you. And I had psychiatrists basically fire me and tell me not to come back because I wouldn't sign a contract to gain 3 pounds a week. It was maddening. I mean, I could no more gain 3 pounds a week than put myself on the moon. I mean, that was just crazy, but that's how they qualified whether you were getting better or not, was strictly by weight. So 5 years after that surgery in 2015, I knew it had to have something to do with my brain, but I didn't know what. I found a couple of books at the library by Julia Ross called The Mood Cure and The Diet Cure. And in those books, she exposed me for the very first time to understanding that the amino acids from animal foods actually make their neurotransmitters in the brain. And if they're not available, then all kinds of disorders will, erupt. And at that same time, we had gotten internet and a smart TV for the first time, and YouTube for the first time. And back then, what was available was TED Talks. And so I decided to search to see if there was anyone else besides Julia Ross and her books that were talking about what the brain needs to heal. Is there other doctors out there? And that's when I found Dr. Georgia Ede and Dr. Chris Palmer. I binge watched everything that was available. And I also looked them up online and found articles that I could read online. And they all backed up the same premise that I found in Julia Ross's books, that in order for the brain to function correctly, it needs the whole, complete amino acids from meat. This was a light bulb moment for me. At the same time, I was skeptical, couldn't imagine that it could be true, couldn't imagine that it was going to help me. But at the same time, it's the only thing that hadn't been tried. It's the only thing in 35 years that was missing from my diet. If I had been someone, because there are some people who have anorexia, they strictly count calories and they still eat, some meat here or there. If I had been that way, it may not have been such a huge revelation to me to think that maybe this could actually help me. I may have been more skeptical, but that was my light bulb moment. So I spent a couple of weeks thinking about this, doing more research, continuing to get sicker. At this point, that's all I was eating was a cup of spinach and a cup of cooked celery every day. That's all I was consuming. All I was allowing myself to eat. I obsessively thought about food all day long. Every food, dessert, sugars, meat, everything. Craved everything, but couldn't allow myself to eat them. And, by that many decades of starvation, your stomach doesn't even growl anymore. Your body knows that you're not going to feed it. So I spent a lot of the time, most of the time, not even knowing what hunger was, let alone understanding what satiety is. So I decided to try this. I set myself on a plan to introduce meat, and it needed to be something that I could handle. Since I had gone that long without eating any, the only thing I could think of that would be mild and not have a strong taste or odor, and what I thought I could handle would be fat-free chicken breast. And so that's where I started with 1 ounce, 2 tablespoons. And the very first night that I did that, in the beginning of January 2018, it was the hardest thing that I ever had to do. Just 2 bites of chicken. I sat at the kitchen table and just wept and just cried and just was tormented over this. But I had nothing left to try. So I promised myself that I would do this every day, and I was hoping that in a week or a week and a half, it would be easier and I would double it. So 1 ounce would become 2, 2 would become 3, and so on and so forth as the weeks went on. And it did get easier. And at about the 8-week mark, which then I was eating 8 ounces of chicken, that was when I found Dr. Ken Berry and Dr. Shawn Baker on YouTube. And we all know that they talk about the superiority of nutrition in beef as opposed to other meat. And so I knew that I needed to try to switch to beef. And the anorexia feature is really hard to try and work on this, because I wasn't trading one whole plate of food for another. I wasn't trading the SAD diet, standard American diet, plate full of food for a plate full of meat. I literally was only eating those 2 cups of vegetables. So that component in there makes it very difficult. But the way that I was doing it was working. So at the 3-month mark, I had switched over to 8 ounces, 10 ounces, right around in there with ground beef. And then when I got to the 6-month mark, I was noticing some changes. Some of my symptoms, my mental symptoms, were lessening. I wasn't quite as depressed. My panic attacks were less frequent, and my anxiety seemed to be a little better. The OCD was starting to lessen. The times that I felt the overwhelming urge to cut my arms and legs was becoming less, and that was a miracle to me, because I had tried to stop that behavior many times daily. I would promise myself that I wouldn't do it anymore. And since it's a neurological condition, you literally cannot stop. Even though you can control your hands, what you're doing, the mental illness component of it wins out, and you end up succumbing to it and doing that behavior anyway, and then feeling guilt and shame afterwards and promising that you'd never do it again. There is a release that happens, and I associate it with when someone is bulimic and they're vomiting, they're purging through vomiting. There is a brief few seconds there that's a euphoric stress release, and that is the same release that I would feel when I would cut my arms and legs and pull out hair. It was a momentary high and a momentary release that would mitigate the torment that I was feeling. It's very difficult to explain, but that's the way it was. And at that 6-month mark, my anorexia wasn't any better yet, but I was looking forward now to eating that ground beef. And the other part that's difficult is the fat component. We know that we need cholesterol. We know that we need fat for our brains to function correctly. Well, somebody who's suffering that severely with anorexia is not going to be able to eat spoonfuls of tallow. They're not. I wouldn't even eat broccoli in a restaurant if I wasn't absolutely sure that it was completely steamed and plain with no oil. If I suspected at all that there was any oil on that broccoli, I couldn't eat it. So that's a difficult component when you're trying to go ketogenic therapy, you're trying to go carnivore. So I did what I could, and that was to eat the whole cut of meat. So at that 6-month mark, I was able to then put chuck roasts in the slow cooker. That gave me a really higher fat profile, but it didn't cause the mental anguish and the anxiety over trying to eat spoonfuls of oil or butter or fat. But it did the same healing. within my brain. When I got to the 9-month mark, I was to a point where I didn't need to add an ounce and be so rigid. I was finally able to recognize when I was full and the hunger signals were coming back. And my brain fog had lifted enough that I decided that I wanted to see if any of my digestive issues could possibly be coming from all of the years that I overconsumed high oxalate foods, like the spinach and the celery that I was eating, along with a lot of other history prior to that of really overconsuming high oxalate vegetables. So at that 9-month mark, I went on, didn't have a name for it then, but what we know now is the lion diet. I went to beef, salt, and water and eliminated those vegetables. And yes, many of my physical issues that I had were directly caused by oxalate toxins. So I had diagnosed and was deemed permanent a condition called interstitial cystitis and vulvodynia. That is when the oxalate crystals are settling, much like forming a kidney stone, but they're forming those, crystals and settling in and irritating the bladder and the pelvic area, and it feels like shards of glass. It's extremely painful. And doctors said it was permanent. There was no cause and no cure. You just have to live with it. Well, it completely went away, along with 7 other issues that I had that were directly caused by the oxalates. Once those oxalates started chelating and dumping out of my system with certain supplements that I was taking to help chelate them out, magnesium is a chelator. So I started to feel better physically, and at that 9 to 12 month mark, I was all in on the lion diet, and I continued to increase my consumption of red meat. Sometimes it was chuck roast, sometimes it was ground beef, sometimes it was steak. But when I got to the 12-month mark and I was at about 1.5 pounds of red meat a day, everything was gone. Everything was healed. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would be free of these schizoaffective voices. I was hoping for it to just be a little better. It's gone. There are no voices screaming in my head. I have a sane, calm brain. My thoughts are my own, and they've never returned. I've been without them for 6 years, and they have never returned after a lifetime of torment. The OCD, the cutting, the hair pulling is completely gone. It wasn't something that I needed to force myself to stop, and it's not an activity that I look at now and am drawn back to. I look at it now and say, I can't believe I ever did that. I can't believe that my brain was so disordered that there was a drive there to harm myself in that manner. I was able to walk away and never do it again. The clinical depression has never returned. The anxiety has never returned. I live in overflowing thankful joy and freedom every day. And I have never had an issue again with it. And the anorexia, every single anorexic feature is completely gone because my brain is healed. The body dysmorphia is gone. I now look at myself in the mirror and see what I truly look like instead of seeing someone who's obese. I have no issues with excessive exercise anymore. I exercise to rebuild my body and to be good to my body, not as a punishment anymore. There is no drive to starve. There is no trigger that if I go without a meal or go a certain number of hours without a meal that that I'm going to relapse. It's not there anymore. And to further understand that weight gain in and of itself does not heal anorexia. That first year of my healing, I had not gained a pound. I was still between 75 and 80 pounds. but my brain was healed. The mental illness was completely healed without gaining weight. So the second through the fourth year was when I spent all of my time and energy rebuilding my body by then increasing more food and weightlifting and rebuilding what was broken, rebuilding and packing on muscle that was so absent for so many years. It's just an amazing life. And I'm compelled to speak. I cannot stay silent about it because there are millions of sufferers out there that need to know that if traditional treatment is failing them, there's still something that you can do, that there is complete healing waiting for them. And no one is beyond hope. No one is beyond redemption. No one is too far gone. When I started speaking out on social media, it was in response to a tweet that Dr. Shawn Baker put out a long time ago. He asked a question wanting to know if anyone thought that food or nutrition could impact mental health. And there were a lot of replies on there that said, that's ridiculous. Mental illness and mental health has nothing to do with what you eat, with nutrition. I had prayed for a long time of when to get involved, and that was my message. That was when God said, it's time to get involved, and it's time to start talking about this. And it's time to start being a voice for those who don't have a voice. And it's time to start sharing what I've gone through in the hopes that even if I help one person, it will mean that the 40 years that I spent were not in vain, that I could help someone else. So that's when I started speaking out. And at that point, that was when Nick Norowitz reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to do the documentation to be involved in a case series that he and another author were putting together to be entered into the Journal of Metabolic Health, specifically on using an animal-based diet to heal anorexia. So I jumped into that, and I've been hit the ground running ever since.
Wow. That is amazing. Seriously, very amazing. Now, I know that you've had some social media presence for a while, but I want to roll back to another point. You said you started doing weightlifting to try to rebuild, but how did you manage that when you had osteopenia or osteoporosis? Now, how did that work out for you? You didn't break bones anymore?
No, I didn't. I spent a lot of time. I'm a researcher, so I spent a lot of time that first year that I was healing. I knew that I didn't want to live with fractures anymore. And I knew that I didn't want to take the medications that the orthopedists wanted to put me on, that I knew from research did not actually rebuild bone, the different osteoporosis medications. So I began researching, what do bones need? Just the same research that I did to find out what the brain needs. So I came up with a protocol to put myself on to reverse osteoporosis and to rebuild bone. I researched what components are needed in the bone to actually rebuild. And that's when I learned that your bones are 50% protein. You need very high protein in your diet to have not only enough to sustain life, but you need abundant nutrition to have extra so that it can be used to rebuild bone density. Your bones don't really need that much calcium. They don't need calcium supplementation, which is what's pushed in mainstream media. Calcium makes your bones brittle. It does not make your bones strong. Your bones need certain micro minerals that are found in unrefined mineral salt, like silica and phosphorus and boron. And your bones need zinc and iron and magnesium. These are all things that your bones need to rebuild and to reverse osteoporosis. So combining the supplements and now utilizing a large amount of unrefined mineral salt, combining that with increasing my animal protein amount even farther, which is what I eat now, which is what I have done for the past 4 years to reverse all of this. I eat 3 pounds of meat every day. The sun is important. Vitamin D is important. All of these things together will force your body to rebuild bone. And then the component of weightlifting, your bones will not be stimulated to rebuild, and they won't be stimulated in the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts unless you are doing weight-bearing activity. It needs strength training in order for there to be that load burden for your body to utilize all the other components that you're using, nutrition, supplements, microminerals. It also needs the weight-bearing exercise to then rebuild bone. So this is what I did, and I started from where I was. That involved 2-pound weights for my arms and my legs, and a 5-pound bag of sand in a backpack to make my own like rucksack, my own weight vest in a tiny amount. And so I started from where I was. That was where I was. And when you get to the place where those weights and those exercises that you're doing become easy, then it's time to add more weight. So you certainly don't want to set yourself up for injury by all of a sudden just lifting heavy things. That is going to cause injury. But you start from where you are and you figure out what weight is challenging for you, and you stick with that until it becomes easy. And that's what I did. And so every 6 months or so, those weights became easy and I would add more weight. Now I strength train fairly heavy, not as heavy as bodybuilders, not as heavy as men. But I now have a 30-pound weight vest that I wear, that I use for lower body strengthening to build muscle and to maintain my osteoporosis healing. That 30 pounds of added weight in that weight vest while you're doing stairs, walking lunges, and squats will not only stimulate your muscle, but stimulate bone if you're eating enough protein and getting enough minerals. They all work together. And I have 30-pound dumbbells that I use for arms and shoulders and upper body weight. And I have a home weight gym at home that I do, shoulder work with. And I keep my abdominals strengthened by doing a lot of different difficulty levels of planks. It's just things that I've researched and put together a plan where I was, and then slowly advanced it as time went on in order to be where I am now.
Also dancing with your husband. I've seen those photos that you got out there.
Yeah, that was my daughter's wedding a year ago. Yes, that was a special night.
Congratulations. So let's pull that back again, though, because I want to go a little bit further back in it, because I know you're married and I know that you have kids, right? And so I was curious, you must have gotten married in the midst of all your suffering.
Yes.
Right?
He and I met at church 32 years ago. And I, of course, was very skeletal then at 16, 18 years old. He knew just from looking at me that, that I had problems. Obviously, he didn't know the extent to which I was ill, but he knew that I was sick. We became very good friends, and through dating for a year and a half, and then got married. He's only had who I am now for 6 years. He is such a godly and strong and dedicated husband and man. He loved me unconditionally all of those years. We are equal partners, and in a covenant marriage with God as our head. And so I always knew that he would never leave me. But of course, it wasn't the marriage that I wanted. It wasn't the way that I wanted to be for him. You know, he ended up being basically my caretaker instead of us each putting 100% into it, because I was just so sick for so many years. And even what people would consider simple things like going out on a date with your spouse, which is important. We stopped doing that. We stopped even attempting to. He stopped even asking me because it was torture. I couldn't relax. I couldn't enjoy myself. That's all I could eat was a bowl of plain lettuce at a restaurant. You know, that wasn't what that date was supposed to be. It was supposed to be reconnecting and sharing with each other how our weeks were, and sharing a meal together and relaxing and enjoying each other's company, which is now what we're doing and redeeming that time now. We go out now and can finally be with each other what it should have been all along.
I've seen some of those photos you got out there. Is this steak for the man? No, it's for me. I love those captions. Those are great. Your social media presence is amazing. At the same time, though, I know that it has garnered some difficult responses from people out there. What is it you suppose that drives some people to just have virulent reactions to the stuff that you post?
I get my share of haters. I get my share of naysayers out there that they, part of them, I think, just want to be argumentative. They don't believe that I've healed from what I had. And so they just want to pick at me, I think. They can't open their minds up to the fact that what we eat does impact mental health. So that's, half of them. And the other half seem to be from the vegan community, who seem to feel the need to tell me that if I had done veganism correctly, if I had done it well enough and done it long enough, that I could have done it without harming animals. And I try sometimes to have an adult discussion with them. I try to explain to them that this is what I had to do, that if I had been able to thrive and been well on a plant-based diet, there would have been no reason for me to explore anything else. And I would have gladly done that. But this is what I had to do for medical reasons in order to save my life. And I thought at least that they would accept that and say, okay, I don't want to eat that way, but okay for you. Because I have even posed to them, what if your mother or your sister was plagued with mental illness or physical illness, and the only way that they could get well is if they ate animal products? Would you deny that? Would you tell them that they cannot eat those things and pronounce them a life of suffering, of illness, in order to support your ideology that we cannot consume any animal products? Would you do that to your mom or your sister? And they won't come back with an adult discussion. They either send me a horrifyingly graphic, bloody picture of a cow being tortured in a third world country, or they ask me if I've been to a slaughterhouse 12 times in a row. They won't have an actual discussion with me. So most of the time, I either ignore it or I give up, or once in a while, when I'm feeling especially playful, I might, call them out on their crap, and just put it out there that that they don't have a corner on the market on truth. They don't.
No, no, they most certainly don't. And their hypocrisy is so glaring. The reality is they know if they come out and say, yes, I would damn my mother to such a thing, or condemn
Right.
my family or my wife, that they would look like absolute assholes.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Wow. This has been an amazing meetup. I'm so happy to have been able to connect with you, Valerie, because I've been chasing this meetup for quite some time. And when I found out that you joined that study, I thought, man, that's going to be amazing, because it's certainly going to help so many people out there. What is the fruit of that so far, or do you not know?
It has, last summer officially been entered into the Journal of Metabolic Health. So it has, completely been entered. And at that time, even though I had and had to be under anonymity and was labeled as patient number 3 with a pseudonym name, after it gets entered, then I have the freedom to reveal my identity, which I had planned to do all along. I wanted to be a resource for anyone. If I ever saw anyone referencing it, I could then come back and say, do you want to talk about it? Because I'm patient number 3. We can have a discussion about this. If these are not strangers in this study that you can't reach out and find one of them and actually put skin on the 8-page report. You can actually talk to me and understand that I'm a real person, and that this is actually what I went through, and this is actually what I did to get better. There has been a lot that has thankfully gone on partly because of that case series. There was one prior to that with one patient in it using a ketogenic metabolic therapy and ketamine infusion therapy, and she was also healed the same way. And so those kind of case series that are now in the books has prompted certain foundations to donate money, and there are clinical trials going on right now. There's one going on in California under the Dr. Guido Frank, who is conducting a clinical trial right now that is using a ketogenic metabolic diet for anorexia and bulimia. And it's literally going on right now. So these case series that have been entered into these different journals are making an impact, because it is getting psychiatrists and physicians more information than what has been put out there prior. Dr. Chris Palmer has things going on also. There are billions of dollars that is being used for other mental illness protocols using the same thing, using ketogenic diets and carnivore diets to heal other mental illnesses. And it's just amazing that it's finally happening, that there's going on right now. There are more than 15 clinical trials going on worldwide using ketogenic diets to mitigate mental and also physical illness. So it's an exciting time to watch how all of this unfolds.
That is amazing, because that's really where the tide turns, is whether or not there's a study for X, Y, or Z thing. And it's amazing to see that. Wow. I'm so happy that we've had this moment to connect. So, Valerie, every time I close out, I ask somebody if they would drop a little pearl of wisdom, a little nugget for people to take away with them. What have you got for our viewers?
What I usually say, what I always say, is what, a little bit of what I reiterated before, is that no one is beyond hope, and no one is too far gone. no matter what you're dealing with, if it's mental illness or physical illness, trying food, trying nutrition to change your food and change your life, there are no downsides. There are no medication side effects. This is food that we're using. And so I always tell people, what have you got to lose? If your back is against the wall and you have nothing left to try, and you're feeling helpless and hopeless, and you're living with illness, you are not thriving every day, that you feel like you're just surviving and existing, this is your perfect opportunity. This is your perfect time to embark on this and watch how you heal. It's just an amazing elimination diet that is root cause healing for real permanent health.
Thank you very much. Thank you so very much for joining me today. Yeah.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I'm sorry that it took this long for us to finally connect. I've had you on my mind for months and months, and it just didn't work out schedule wise. So I'm thrilled that we're doing this also.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today to speak with Miss Valerie. I call her Valiant Val. Yeah, Valiant Val. I am so very, very pleased. Okay, we're going to shut it down here. See you later, everybody. Be bold.